Last speaker for this session is Rabbi Dr. Michael Harris. Dr. Harris is Senior Research Fellow at the London School of Jewish Studies and a Senior Rabbi of the Hampstead Synagogue. His most recent book, co-authored with Daniel Reinhold, is Nietzsche, Soloveitchik, and Contemporary Jewish Philosophy. The topic of his presentation will be violent biblical texts in the thought of Rabbi Sachs.
Friends, I'd like to begin with thanks to the organizers of this conference, Miriam, Jonathan, Professor Ben Pazi, and everyone at Bar Ilan who has put on this wonderful event, and for the invitation, which I'm really touched and flattered by. It's been an absolutely magical couple of days. It's been worth it just for the social, and as well as the fantastic intellectual content. And not least this morning, we've heard three really excellent presentations, and it's been a real festival of friendship and of learning and of honor to Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha. And particularly wonderful to see Lady Elaine here with us, and Joanna Benarosh, who worked with Rabbi Sachs for so long and continues to propagate his wonderful legacy. I want to just acknowledge briefly the precise location we're in, Bet Harav Jacobovitz. It's when my father, Zichrono Livracha, was Rabbi of St. John's Synagogue in London. We had the great privilege of living diagonally opposite the Chief Rabbi's residence in Hamilton Terrace. He and my father were very close, and I benefited hugely from Rav Jacobovitz's influence. And it just wanted to acknowledge the place where we're in. Also, as you get Archie mentioned, those three figures, just an autobiographical thing while I'm waking up. You know, Rabbi Sachs used to talk about the rabbi who dreamt he was giving a drosha and woke up and he was. So that's it's a bit how I'm feeling. Just on autobiographical. So those, my father, Zichron Livracha, Chief Rabbi Jacobovitz, Chief Rabbi Sachs, they were three huge influences on me, and as I get older, as by definition we do every day, I think the best thing was that they were all outstanding as young people, but they all became better and better as they got older, that's some comfort anyway for some of us, something to aim for. Okay, now I want to begin by making another 37 introductory points before we. Tamra, I want to put in a claim. Tamra, in her wonderful presentation yesterday, asked whether there was anyone who could date being influenced by Rabbi Sachs earlier than 1987. So I'm going to put in a bid for 1982. When I had the again great good luck that Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, was a younger colleague of my father, Zichrono Livracha, in the United Synagogue, and he called one day Rabbi Sachs called one day in 1982 to speak to my father. I answered the phone, and I'd just been accepted to do philosophy as an undergraduate in Cambridge. And don't be impressed, I failed to get into my first choice college, St. John's, who wrote me a wonderful letter. Dear Michael, we're sorry not to be able to offer you a place. We hope you find a place at some other college. So another college dragged me out of the pool. That's for people who don't get in first time. And I just got in. I was going to do philosophy. Rabbi Sachs said to me, "Have you seen After Virtue by Alistair MacIntyre? That is the most important book in moral philosophy to have come out for some time." So that was 1982, Tamra. So there you go. But here I'm going to. It has a happy ending for us both, and for Daniel, who's had to go back to America, which is that 30 years later, in 2012, when Tamra, Daniel, Reinhold, and I were working, we had the privilege of co-editing Radical Responsibility. Parentheses on sale in the bookshop. Alistair MacIntyre contributed an essay in honor of Rabbi Sachs. So it really came full circle. That arguably the greatest moral philosopher living, wrote in Rabbi Sacks's honor, and we had the privilege to be involved with that. Okay. How much time have I got left? Right. Violent biblical text in the thought of Rabbi Sacks. So any sensitive reader of Tanakh is perplexed by texts which seem to condone or even mandate violent actions for which the moral justification is unclear. Rabbi Sacks's most systematic contribution, treatment of this topic is Not in God's Name, book that's been referred to several times already, subtitle Confronting Religious Violence, came out in 2015. There are relevant passages elsewhere also, but that is the most sustained treatment. There's a wider context in which Rabbi Sacks addresses the issue of religious violence, which he makes explicit early on in the book. He talks about the horrendous acts of religiously motivated violence which have occurred with alarming regularity since 9/11/2001. The only way to have a genuine prospect of stemming this sinister tide, he believes, is to formulate a theology that severs the link between religious motivation and acts of terror. We must not cede the interpretation of religion to those who use it to justify radical violence. And Rabbi Sacks is admirably clear at the beginning of Not in God's Name that challenge applies to all three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism included, reminding us of Baruch Goldstein's massacre of Palestinian Arabs at prayer on Purim 1994 and Yigal Amir's assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in November 1995, both murderers self-identified as Orthodox Jews. So a key component of developing a theology of life and peace rather than death and violence is confronting what Rabbi Sacks calls biblical hard texts. Passages, quote from Rabbi Sacks, which interpreted literally can lead to hatred, cruelty and war. The key to dealing with such texts for Rabbi Sacks is to avoid fundamentalism, meaning a literal understanding of the biblical text that ignores the wider context of biblical values and overlooks the importance of textual interpretation. Parenthetically, there is, I think, an interesting shift between The Dignity of Difference, which came out in 2002, and Not in God's Name in 2015. The Dignity of Difference, Rabbi Sacks writes, every great faith has within it harsh texts. The choice is ours. Will the generous texts of our tradition serve as interpretive keys to the rest, or will the abrasive passages determine our ideas of what we are and what we are called on to do? But in Not in God's Name, Rabbi Sacks doesn't say that we have a choice. It's clear which way he wants us to choose in Dignity of Difference. Of course, he obviously wants us to choose, to prioritise, to privilege the generous text over what he terms the abrasive one, but he gets rid of the language of choice in Not in God's Name and says, quote, hard texts need interpreting. Without it, they lead to violence. God has given us both the mandate and the responsibility to do just that. So that it's a clear imperative. Examples of hard texts cited by Rabbi Sacks are familiar to anyone who's been involved in this area, or indeed to really any thinking Jewish person. Obviously, the Akedah. He has a whole essay devoted to the Akedah in essays on ethics, on Sidra Vayera, 7 Canaanite nations, the Shiva Amamin, the mitzvah to wipe out Amalek, the Ben Sorah and Moreh, rebellious son, war against the Midianites in Bamidbar, and wars of conquest in the book of Yehoshua and the book of Joshua. So, Rabbi Sacks's strategies for diffusing hard texts. How are we doing for time, Amara? 10 minutes gone? We're okay. 10 minutes. 10 minutes, okay, fine. 10 minutes gone or 10 minutes to go? It was the same. 10 minutes to go. It's the same. It's the same. 10 minutes to go. Okay. So Rabbi Sacks seems to have 3 strategies for diffusing hard texts. The first one is what is the wider context of biblical values. So Rabbi Sacks argues that the underlying value of Tanakh is always peace, despite the apparent militarism of some texts in Tanakh. So he quotes familiar Pesukim, Vayikra, chapter 26, V'natati shalom ba'aretz, v'cherev lo tavo ba'atzechem. Yeah, so we want peace and not the sword. Of course, the culmination of Birkat Kohanim, V'yasem lecha shalom, God should give you peace. That's the ultimate bracha in Judaism. And very famously, Isaiah 2:4, about etc., beating the swords into plowshares, but as always, Rabbi Sachs gives us a chidushim in passing. Covenant Conversation, page 333, Covenant Conversation Genesis, he writes about this verse. I mean, it's become such a cliche, this pasuk, that we often don't reflect on it. Rabbi Sachs writes, this vision of a world at peace was not centuries, but millennia ahead of its time. I mean, we think of it as a cliche. A nation should not live sole habitation, but it was, in the context of the ancient world, millennia, it was something really millennia ahead of its time. Then he quotes pasuk from Divrei Hayamim, Chronicles 1:22, where David HaMelech, or King David, is told that Dam la'rov shafachta, because you spilt blood, you're not going to build my temple, it's going to be your son, King Shlomo. So that's strategy number one, the wider context of biblical values. And here Rabbi Sachs is really doing what he has instructed us to do in the preface, which is interpret the the texts which appear to command unjustified violence in light of the other texts, of the underpinning, the underlying values, rather than the other way around. Strategy number two is one which is very familiar, and other writers have put it forward as well, which is to stress that we don't read within traditional Judaism, we don't read the Bible literally. We have a Torah Sheba'al Al Peh, we have the oral tradition through which we read the Tanakh, and so he cites several examples of this, and I'm going to indicate a couple which he doesn't mention but are in the same spirit. So we've got the famous idea of Kfar La Sancherev Melech Hashuv V'Belet Ha'olam, that when Sancherev, king of Assyria, comes up and exiles the 10 tribes, around 722 BCE. He mixes everyone up. We're no longer able to identify the national ethnic origins of any given individual. Got the Kol de Parish Meruba Parish halachic principle. Any given individual, person or item that is separated from a mixture, we assume has come from the majority of that mixture. And therefore, this affects conversion. In case in the Gemara Brachot 28a, Rabbi Yoshua allows Yehuda Ger Ammoni into the Ammonite into the community because we're no longer able to identify ethnic identities. Therefore, it's not clear that he is an Ammonite who is not allowed to marry into the Jewish community. This idea is alluded to in Rambam. Mishnah Torah Malachim 5:4, where Rambam says mitzvata selachrim shiva amamin. So there's a positive commandment in the Torah to destroy the 7 Canaanite nations, uchva avad zichram, but we're no longer able to identify anyone. We don't know who anyone is anymore, and therefore the commandment can't be put into practice. Hagot Maimoniot, this isn't a quote Rabbi Sachs gives, a source Rabbi Sachs gives, but it's in the same direction, regarding a mitzvah to wipe out Amalek. Hagot Maimoniot on Hilchot Malachim, 13th century, mitzvah zuenano hagetat yomot HaMashiach. This isn't within, someone put it yesterday in a presentation, human history. It's something which is deferred to the Messianic era, kind of pushed off into the future. At least it's not practical in the here and now. So it's a way of deferring, if not deflecting the moral problem. And then we have Rambam's conditionalizing of the commandment to wipe out Amalek by making it ad shekorin shalom, so we don't make any war against anyone, even if it's a milchemet mitzvah, even if it's obligatory war, unless we've offered them peace first. And then he says, Rambam says explicitly, Hilchot Malachim 6:4, Shiva Amim v'Amalek shelo hishlimu, ein manichin mahem neshama. It's not, if they didn't make peace, then we make war against them, but not otherwise. And then again, a source that Rabbi Sachs doesn't quote, unlike the Rambam, Mincha Chinuch and some other modern halachis go a step further than the classical halacha in applying the Sancherev principle, I'd call it, to Amalek, and saying there's no operable commandment to wipe out Amalek nowadays because Sancherev has mixed everybody up, whereas in classical halacha that was applied to the 7 nations. Okay. How are we doing? 5 minutes? 2 minutes. Wow. Okay. So, that's the basis for negotiation, or that's... Okay. 2 minutes. Okay, fine. So, the third plank. You won't stop me. Okay, fine. It's quick as I can. So, third plank. So, we've had the plank of wider values of biblical text. We've had the oral Torah. Third plank of Rabbi Sachs's dealing with our text, value system of Chazal and post-biblical Judaism. And I can do this quickly because Tzachi Cohen did this yesterday. Is the text about the in Mishnah Shabbat about carrying on Shabbat. Are weapons of war considered to be clothing, or are they considered to be something positive or negative? Considered to be negative in one view in the Mishnah, and then in the Gemara, as Tzachi showed us, Rav Kahana can't even understand. He can't even grasp the fact that you may have taken a verse literally to be referring to swords as a positive thing. Right now, so the most substantive points in the last 90 seconds, hopefully. So, where the chiddush is, I think the main chiddush in Rabbi Sachs on difficult biblical texts is that he argues, quote from Not in God's Name, across several centuries we witness one of the most profound metamorphoses in religious history. So he says there's a big shift here, picking up momentum after the disastrous second rebellion against Rome, quote, from the world of military victories and all that went with them to, quote, a culture of study and scholarship in which words had replaced swords and the most important battles were intellectual ones. He goes on to say that, quote, by the 2nd or 3rd century, Rabbinic Judaism has internalized the full destructive force of religiously motivated violence. So Rabbi Sachs here is not just making the uncontroversial claim that the Jewish world after the destruction of the Second Temple and failed revolts against Rome underwent fundamental political, geographic and structural religious transformations, but is arguing in addition that there was a gradual but major shift in religious values towards, quote, spiritual maximalism and military minimalism. So it's very interesting, the shift in, a radical shift in values from militarism to peace within rabbinic literature. But I think Rabbi Sachs is best read as more conservative, small c, arguing that not that there's been a shift, but rather a return, because he stresses that these values of peace, of course, deeply rooted in the Nevi'im, in our prophetic literature. So there's a return in values, but it's an interesting move and something I think novel. Penultimately, point about Rabbi Sachs's meta-ethics, and then we'll end with the point about his ethics. One easy way of dealing with morally difficult texts is divine command theory, in which you say God determines morality. Therefore, whatever God commands is moral, and therefore, if God commands us to murder apparently innocent people, then that ipso facto becomes moral. Another strategy you could use is what Daniel Statman and Avi Sagi in their wonderful book, Religion and Morality, in 1995, called the conflict thesis. This is the way Kierkegaard reads the Akedah, where morality stays in place. It's not dependent on God, but God's command can override morality. And those are two easy strategies for religious thinkers to use in dealing with difficult biblical texts. Either God commanded it, so it's moral, or yes, it is immoral as you think, but God overrides that. Rabbi Sachs notably does not do either of those things, even though in a general comment in his oeuvre, he sometimes comes quite close to divine command theory. For example, in saying that without God there are no objective moral values. He says in The Great Partnership, he also has what Sagi and Statman call weak dependence, the empirical claim that one is more likely to behave morally if one is religious. Despite that, he never uses divine command theory as a way of dealing with the morally difficult, with the hard texts, which is very, I think, significant. And finally, and so apologies for the going into injury time. Injury time is extended in the World Cup. You know, so that was 2 minutes. It's point about. So, having made a point, Rabbi Sachs's meta-ethics, a point about his ethics. He strives to interpret hard biblical texts and indeed Jewish tradition as a whole in a way that is consonant with our fundamental moral commitments that are deeply rooted in Jewish tradition itself. That alone is the most important contribution by Rabbi Sachs and a very timely one indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers for today, Dr. Ganzel, Mrs. Zaks, Dr. Harris, and Dr. Rabbi Lee. And I think we'll have time for 2 questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of point to personal privilege. So Dr. Lee correctly referred people yesterday who discussed alienation and faith and did not give room for the Hasidic influence. I assume probably referring primarily to my paper. I want actually give me an opportunity to fill something in. So I told people when I was preparing my paper that I actually spent more time ruthlessly cutting, the JPS translation, ruthlessly cutting my paper than actually writing it. And when I delivered my paper, I said, for purpose of time, I'm going to skip over the section of loneliness. Actually, in the bracket, I actually had, but I want to add something. It's not just, I'm not just saying I had it, but it's something I want to add. I actually referred to the fact that Rabbi Saks's view is rooted in Hasidism and Chabad, and I referred to the unity of all souls in God. But then, I'm adding something. What I also referred to, Rabbi Saks does not refer to Rabbi Soloveitchik's view in The Lonely Man of Faith, where the unity of the members of the covenantal community is rooted in the divine ethical norm given to Adam and Eve. And it's the divine ethical norm which is the source of the unity. And that is obviously reflecting my own view as a student of Rabbi Soloveitchik. I said, it seems to me that Rabbi Soloveitchik's view is truer to the, maybe it's controversial, to the biblical and rabbinic tradition than the view of Chabad. So that's the point. That's the part which I left out, and I thank you that now I can sort of get it in. Again, I just wanted to say with reference to Jessica Saks's wonderful talk on translation, that actually in Alienation and Faith, Rabbi Saks has a whole discussion about how to translate the word ashrei. And he goes on in a long discussion, but even more significant in the second published essay, which we spoke about, on Rosenzweig, he says people call Rosenzweig a Baal Tshuva, but we really should call him a translator. And I understand when he says translator, he means 2 things. A, that he actually translated text. He translated Yehuda Halevi's poems, and together with Buber, he translated the Bible into German. So it literally translated, but the other sense of translating is that he translated the tradition, namely bringing the biblical and rabbinic tradition into the modern world in a modern idiom, but trying to be faithful to the substance of that tradition. And I think Rabbi Saks was a translator in both of those senses.
Thank you. Thank you for a comment. Yes, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you. That was fascinating, all of you. Okay, I have a question for Reuven and for Tova. Okay? I would say, this is the assumption, that what Rabbi Saks may well have been influenced by Lubavitch, and I would say was definitely sympathetic and extremely saw great religious significance in the state of Israel, but he was not a messianic religious Zionist, and he did not believe that Lubavitcher Rebbe was the Messiah. Okay? So, given that, would you say that he's still A, a religious Zionist, and B, a Lubavitcher?
Either of you? Would you like to comment?
Ah, okay.
There are different levels of affiliation and association, and the criticism of calling him a chassid would probably be stronger if I was talking in a Chabad crowd than talking here. But all I wanted to emphasize is the depths of the influence, and not just in his mode of outreach and scope. And so that the idea that he got that from the rabbi, the idea of leadership, and which is he mentioned so many times, and people acknowledge that in his Torah itself, that there's a deep significance of that link. And the truth is, who was us? Everyone's trying to, I mean, there's no badge or.
You haven't met me before, have
There's people aren't chassid yet. But, so I don't think it matters in a significant way when we're thinking about what he's doing and trying to understand what he's saying.
This gentleman.
Yeah,
I
so
talk
I'll
about,
walk in the
okay.
same path, and I'll say
Okay.
that from my definition of Zionism, I thought that we might be in some controversy, but he might have had his definition of Zionism, and he might have defined it himself as a Zionist. So, just like asking who's a Chassid is a question that depends on who you're asking, I would say also asking who's a Zionist is a question that
I
depends
thought
on
the
who you're
politics
asking.
panel was later.
Yeah. Okay. This gentleman over there. Yeah.
Do you think that Rabbi Sachs's reluctance to give a full-throated endorsement of Zionism, your kind of Zionism, my kind of Zionism, was based on his deep sense of discomfort with power, hard power, which is part of the Zionist enterprise?
I don't think someone here who can answer that question better than me.
I can't resist answering all these questions.
You can come to the podium.
Yeah, you can. Please.
My husband was 100% a Zionist. We lived in England, and he felt all along that he could achieve more for Am Yisrael, for Yiddishkeit, by living in the Golan, rather than living here in Israel. And I must tell you that before he took up office as the chief rabbi, we had it about 9 months in Israel, and it was so happened about 2 weeks after he arrived, it was the Gulf War. And after some time, people were, they were, in their shelters, there was some distress. And my husband was approached by the Israeli authorities, I really don't remember, to counsel, to be of help to people who were in distress here. And he said, I am in Israel, there are very, very many Rabbanim here. Why are you coming to me in a nice way? And they said, because you are better at it than Rabbanim who are here. And that is the answer why, and we do in fact have a flat in Yerushalayim, and if things had been different, we would in all the years have had a month here, a month there, whatever. But because we didn't make Aliyah and become part of it, does not mean that it wasn't 100% in his neshama. Anyway.
Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the conference. Thank you, everybody.
Next session.
It's going to be a thing. There's more coming. Yeah.